Well, joining us now from Texas is the New York Post's immigration reporter, Jennie Taer. Jennie, I just mentioned Trump naming former Director of Immigration Tom Homan as his border czar. You reported this week that he has vowed that sanctuary cities will not stop him from deporting migrant criminals. Here's what he had to say on Fox News about this earlier this week.
Some of these Democratic governors say they're going to stand in the way. They're going to make it hard for us. Well, a suggestion: if you're not going to help us, get the hell out of the way, because we're going to do it. So if we can't get assistance from New York City, and we may have to double the number of agents we send to New York City, because we're going to do the job. We're going to do the job without you or with you.
Jennie Taer, this guy does not sound like he's messing around, does he?
No, and Tom is someone who has extensive law enforcement experience, especially in the immigration realm. In Trump's previous administration, he was the acting director of ICE. He previously served at ICE for decades. He has 40 years of experience in the immigration enforcement space. He was a Border Patrol agent early on. And he is someone who is definitely unapologetic, as you showed in those clips. And I think that's something that Trump really wanted in someone in this position, to really contrast the Kamala Harris years of quote unquote border czar. So he again created this position and put in someone who is the complete opposite of what we saw, and someone who's very law enforcement focused and who's focused on really laying down the hammer when it comes to rhetoric, to start to say to some of these illegal migrants who are here, we're coming for you. And it doesn't matter if you're in a sanctuary city or state. And I think what we're also going to see with this is not just that he's going to carry out this mass deportation, but sources I'm talking to within the agency say that you're going to start to see a lot of these migrants run scared and quote unquote self-deport.
Yeah, that's a very interesting option, because if it does become too hot for them to stay or too hard for them to stay, then obviously they will leave. You don't even need to bother deporting them. But what do you say, though, about people like Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey, who said this week that her administration is not going to cooperate with presidential orders from Donald Trump looking to conduct deportations of undocumented migrants? Just have a look at this here.
If the Trump administration requests it, would the Massachusetts State Police assist in mass deportations?
No, absolutely not. Every tool in the toolbox has got to be used to protect our citizens, to protect our residents, and protect our states, and certainly to hold the line on democracy and the rule of law.
What is the mentality here with these Democrat governors who seem to want to keep illegals in the country, in their states, even though we've also seen many reports that places like Massachusetts, they've had a huge number of sex offenders among their illegal migrant population?
Absolutely. The Biden administration, in fact, has been the one to arrest and deport those child sex offenders who were here illegally, that were in Massachusetts, in some of the most wealthy enclaves of the country, in places like Martha's Vineyard, which actually, if we go back and remember the response from the state there when you had Governor Ron DeSantis, transporting migrants there and dropping them into this wealthy area, was to immediately move them out of the area. So this is actually pretty interesting to see the change in rhetoric when the politics change, in the case of Maura Healey and her statements right now. But again, a lot of what Tom Homan and Trump are pushing forward right now is to really prioritize arresting and deporting those who are not only here illegally, but those who are really hardened criminals. And that's what they're going to prioritize first.
And I mean, there's, I think, 1.3 million people who have got standing deportation orders on them. Would those also be among those that they would go after first?
Absolutely. I'm hearing that, those who have already been ordered removed by a judge are part of those priorities. And, another thing that happens is some of these cases, these individuals are checking in with ICE, and the ICE officer in the office knows that this person has a final order now as they're checking in. And so at that point, it should be encouraged. Some of these former Trump administration officials who worked at ICE, possibly who will be back at ICE, are telling me that they should be also part of these priorities. So it's going to be a little bit of Tom Homan sitting down with different ICE offices, with Border Patrol. He told me that, in our conversation, that he really wants to hear what are the biggest issues they're facing right now, where can they put the most resources, because again, it's going to need Congress when it comes to this issue to get detention bed space, to get funding for ICE Air, which carries out the deportations, and to get enough officers out in the streets.
Well, Jenny, I'm glad you mentioned the Border Patrol themselves here, because I can only imagine how disheartened a lot of them would have been over the past 4 years. You must speak to an awful lot of agents and people who are involved with the business. The morale must be through the roof now with a guy like Homan coming in.
It really is. It's a changing of the guard for these Border Patrol agents who for years sought reporters like myself to air their grievances, to tell stories that they felt weren't being told about the reality of the situation at the border, but also it became a story about the morale, like you said, that they were seeing their fellow agents commit suicide, that they were seeing them being assaulted at higher rates along the border by smugglers, that things were changing and it was becoming more dangerous. It was becoming more deadly for them. As soon as Trump got elected, I received many text messages from my sources down at the border, and, it completely changed the morale for them. They were excited to go into work for once, which is something that they aren't excited to do. They've become so desensitized. They go to the job, they just go in, go out. They're processing, they're babysitting. That's how they describe the job, and they're ready to get back out there in the field and on the front lines.
Indeed. And Jenny, finally, before I let you go, you've spoken to Tom Homan before, and I know that the impression he creates in some of these congressional hearings is, a very tough guy kind of cop, but it strikes me, diving more deeply into what he's all about, it strikes me that he actually cares quite deeply, particularly about children and, the effect that all of this people smuggling is having on them. And it reminds me very much of similar debates we've had in Australia about the effects of people smuggling on families and children. Can you just speak a bit more to that actually, this being tough on the border is actually a much more humanitarian thing to do than to leave it open for all sorts of people smugglers and human traffickers and, all sorts of other assorted horrendous activities?
Sure, absolutely. And that's something that Tom has highlighted when speaking with me. Even when he was acting ICE director, I had talked to him at the time, and we would have conversations about those times where he had harrowing experiences rescuing children in these trafficking cases. I had candid conversations about him with that situation. And now that has been metastasized into something that's pretty much uncontrollable when it comes to the number of children who have been let in unaccompanied.
Jennie Taer, thank you so much, and hopefully that change starts to affect itself sooner rather than later. Really appreciate your time.